Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, and welcome to another weekend book review. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita. Today we're tackling a really complex and, timely issue.
Definitely. It's about expertise, public trust, and how populism fits into that picture.
Exactly. And you, our listener, sent in some great stuff articles, even some research, it looks like, all pointing to this friction. So our goal today is to, dissect this idea of the weaponization of expertise. Try to make it clear, structured.
Right. Find those aha moments without just throwing too much information out there.
Yeah, exactly. Understanding the core issues.
And right off the bat, these sources have a specific way they talk about elites, don't they?
They do. It's interesting. Not just about money.
No, it's more about academic credentials, people with advanced degrees in academia, government, the media, that sort of thing.
And the sources point out, often, though not always, leaning a bit left on social issues, maybe living in cities.
Yeah, projecting a certain kind of professional confidence. And understanding that definition is key to grasping the critiques we're seeing.
Okay, so let's dig into that critique then. The big argument seems to be that populist skepticism isn't just, random anger.
Right. It's often framed as a reaction to what they call expert overreach.
This idea that, wisdom isn't only found in fancy degrees, that common sense lived experience that counts too.
It directly challenges the idea that only experts have the real understanding.
And this is a really sharp point from the sources. The claim that elites sometimes package their values as objective facts.
Which effectively shuts ordinary people out of policy debates, right? Makes them feel like they're not smart enough to even have an opinion.
It really blurs the line, doesn't it? Where does technical advice stop and ideology begin?
Exactly.
And here's where one source threw me a bit, talking about 2016 Trump voters.
The finding that a good chunk were middle class, educated even.
Yes. And favored higher taxes on the rich, but deeply distrusted elites thought the system was rigged. It complicates the picture.
It really does. It shows populism isn't just one demographic or one simple set of beliefs.
So what ties it together then? The sources suggest it's less about specific policies.
Less about agreeing on what to do and more about who gets to decide. It's this shared skepticism towards policy expertise itself.
Whether you're talking Sanders supporters or Trump supporters.
Exactly. That seems to be the common thread identified in the material. The issue is the perceived authority and who wields it.
Okay, let's make this concrete. The sources bring up examples of where this expert approach seemed to go wrong. Andrew Cuomo during COVID.
Oh, right. Those press conferences.
Yeah.
And the sources note a kind of lack of pushback sometimes.
Yeah, when he said things that sounded, unscientific. Even cruel, like COVID deaths being all self-imposed.
Or that cheesecake analogy. It felt very detached.
A real disconnect from both science and maybe basic empathy, it seemed. Using that platform in a strange way.
And the core point the sources make is that so many COVID decisions weren't just science. They were about values, trade-offs.
Political questions, really.
Absolutely. Rishi Sunak eventually admitted that, didn't he? About the UK response underestimating the non-scientific parts.
And the argument is, failing to see that, or maybe admit that, hurt public trust.
It seems plausible, yes. When science is presented as the only answer for everything, it can backfire and damage trust in public health bodies down the line. It raises questions about the limits of just looking at the technical side.
The sources also mention this fashionable idea, as they put it, that America's just gotten stupid.
Yeah, people like Tom Nichols talking about a worship of ignorance.
But the counter-argument in our sources is that the skepticism isn't necessarily ignorance.
No, it could be a pretty rational reaction to that perceived elite overreach we talked about.
It's a different way of looking at the same phenomenon.
And there are consequences to that narrow focus. By defining science so tightly during the pandemic, the sources argue we actually missed chances to study what really worked.
So, next time, we might still not know.
Potentially. We might lack good evidence on certain interventions because the debate itself limited the science. It's ironic.
And instead of maybe engaging with critics, the suggestion is some elites just doubled down.
Labeled it all misinformation or disinformation.
Yeah, circling the wagons, like you said, not really fostering a dialogue.
Which brings us neatly to this concept of the diploma divide.
Yes. The sources really emphasize this as a major division in society now.
Big differences, politically and culturally, between people with college degrees and those without. It's not just about education level. It apparently shapes worldviews.
And connected to that is this elite mindset often found in places like universities or the media.
All right, this idea of cosmopolitanism, seeing yourself as a citizen of the world, maybe traveling more.
Even liking sushi is mentioned. It's presented as a cultural marker.
And it can cut across traditional party lines sometimes, but the sources also point to a concentration of specific views within those spaces.
Ideological concentration, particularly on social issues, often leaning left to center.
Yeah, and they cite data, like faculty opposition to hiring conservative colleagues, which raises a question.
Does that lack of diversity weaken checks and balances, like journalists maybe not seeking out as wide a range of views?
It's a concern raised in the material, definitely.
This links to how policy itself is viewed, doesn't it? The technocratic approach.
Exactly. The idea that policy is mostly technical puzzles for experts to solve, which, if you believe strongly in meritocracy,
then it makes sense that the smartest, most credentialed people should be in charge.
it follows logically. But it can lead to some pretty controversial proposals.
Like Jason Brennan's idea about restricting voting based on knowledge.
Yeah, and the sources note how some elites seem to find that appealing. The underlying message being voters are, well,
Too darn stupid, as one source puts it.
but the pushback is strong. Ignorant isn't stupidity. In those knowledge tests, they often miss local understanding, practical wisdom.
Knowing facts isn't the same as understanding your community's needs.
Right. And this idea of an elite-controlled Wikipedia of knowledge, it just doesn't map onto politics very well.
Because political facts are rarely neutral, are they? They're usually framed.
They involve values, interpretations. It's not like scientific data in a vacuum.
Which takes us to that crucial split. Misinformation versus values.
Yes. The sources warn against elites dismissing public feelings as just being wrong about the facts.
When often the disagreement is much deeper, about fundamental values.
Exactly. And value disputes are just harder to solve than factual ones, aren't they?
Maybe that's why there's a temptation to call it a factual error. Makes it seem easier.
Could be. The sources even touch on expressive voting briefly.
And the potential hypocrisy of elites only criticizing it when they dislike the outcome. Okay, let's shift slightly to skepticism itself. The sources argue it's actually good.
Foundational even. Crucial for intellectual inquiry, for science itself, questioning, probing evidence.
Not just blindly accepting things.
Right. But today, skeptic is often used like an insult, isn't it? To shut down debate.
Yeah, it's become weaponized.
And the sources remind us, historically, skepticism has a long respected history. Think Descartes, Hume.
Right, it's not a new or inherently bad thing.
And they suggest that so-called populist skepticism is actually pretty mild compared to deep philosophical skepticism.
So all this points towards needing epistemic humility.
That's the term they use. Acknowledging the limits of our knowledge systems.
And the sources are frank about potential problems within academia, right?
Bias,
Funding issues.
financial conflicts, maybe focusing on tiny effects, the whole replication crisis.
It's not a perfect system.
Definitely not. Which challenges that rosiest view, the Michael Lewis idea that we just need to listen to the right experts.
Because credentials aren't a guarantee of truth.
Exactly. And when experts present their findings as absolutely certain, without acknowledging limits or doubts,
The public loses important nuance. It becomes a performance, not a process.
so epistemic humility means being cautious, using knowledge carefully in debates, knowing its flaws.
And not just dismissing legitimate questions about research because you're worried someone might misuse the answers.
Right. That's a worrying trend mentioned shutting down inquiry for fear of political consequences.
Because expertise is a process, isn't it? Debate, dissent, revision.
Not a finished product to be obeyed. That's a key takeaway.
Which brings us back around to populism again. The sources frame it less as irrational anger.
And more as potentially a logical political tactic, a response to feeling ignored, to that elite overreach.
They mention Eatwell and Goodwin's 4Ds.
Yes, distrust, destruction, deprivation, delinement. Especially distrust of elites perceived to hold different values.
And economic factors play a role too. Neoliberalism, lost jobs, lost status.
A sense of decline, economically and in terms of social respect.
Globalization, offshoring while having benefits. They also fed narratives about inequality, didn't they?
Absolutely. Fueling arguments about the working class being left behind or exploited.
And when people feel they aren't being heard, that voice isn't working.
They might shift to exit. Brexit is used as the prime example of that dynamic.
Now, the sources strongly argue that most policy isn't just for experts. Lay knowledge matters.
Hugely. The experience and values of everyday people are crucial. Think about patient advocacy in healthcare.
Good example. Patients and families bringing their knowledge has genuinely improved things.
Demonstrably so. And they also mention citizen science.
Where regular people contribute to research.
Exactly. And it's being successfully used in regulation and science. The point is, theoretical knowledge is great, but
it doesn't automatically give experts the final say on policy, especially when values clash.
Right. Think about debates over protest policies during COVID, or how to interpret the Constitution. Those aren't purely technical questions.
Yet some elites, the sources say, feel the world is just too complex now for citizens to really participate meaningfully.
And the counter is that maybe those elites aren't seeing the full range of values involved.
So we keep coming back to facts versus values.
It's central. Many fights aren't about facts. They're about core beliefs, ideologies.
And calling a value disagreement a factual error. It just stalls things, makes the other side feel illegitimate.
It hinders finding common ground.
Okay, this leads to something quite provocative. Questioning the whole misinformation crisis narrative.
Yeah, the idea that we're living in some unprecedented post-truth era, the sources challenge that.
They cite social science suggesting there's actually no solid evidence for a massive increase in misinformation or conspiracy beliefs compared to the past.
It's surprising, isn't it? Concerns about fake news aren't new at all. John Adams was complaining about it centuries ago.
Wow, okay.
And even with something like QAnon, research apparently suggests it's more about individual psychology, finding community,
than simply being tricked by bad information or just distrusting institutions.
Seems to be the argument.
Yeah.
Which implies that just trying to cure misinformation might miss the point.
It might distract from the real disagreements over opinions and values.
Possibly. Then there's motivated reasoning.
How we tend to process information in a way that confirms what we already believe, especially with politics.
Exactly. We're directionally motivated.
And the really counterintuitive finding, people who are better with numbers
can actually be more polarized. They use their skills to twist the data to fit their existing views.
That's wild. Not what you'd expect.
Not at all.
So the worry is elites saw the danger of merchants of doubt.
People intentionally muddying the waters.
And maybe overcorrected, became merchants of overconfidence.
Exaggerating certainty, dismissing valid skepticism as just ignorance. That's the concern raised.
But genuine doubt, the sources argue, is actually needed for trust. In science, in leaders.
Yes, doubt, meaning an environment where skepticism is welcome, uncertainty is acknowledged, dissent is possible, where ideas can be questioned.
Okay, final big theme. The closing of the elite mind. Issues around free speech.
Yes, challenges within universities, the press.
And the denial that cancel culture is even a real thing, despite evidence.
Though the sources do say attacks on free speech come from both left and right. But overconfidence in facts can make people less tolerant of debate.
Groupthink in academia. Lack of tolerance. Diversity statements used as ideological screens. Speakers getting canceled.
Those are all discussed. A sense of self-censorship is mentioned too. Lack of ideological diversity on campus.
And the sources critique dismissing concerns about liberal bias, like saying fixing it would mean affirmative action for conservatives.
Right. Or the argument that censorship isn't real if someone can still technically speak somewhere else, like online.
That feels a bit like dodging the issue.
It's presented as sophistry in the source material.
They also question university presidents taking sides on hot-button political issues.
Because it assumes there's only one correct view and dismisses viewpoint diversity. And complex issues like climate change policy do involve trade-offs.
Presenting them as simple, factual matters fuels skepticism when people see the complexities.
Absolutely. The argument is we need to engage with bad ideas too, to understand our own beliefs better.
And the university's role. It should be a place to hash out ideas, teach critical thinking.
Not necessarily be a political activist itself, or take institutional stances on every complex issue.
So wrapping up, the sources really call for nuance, open-mindedness, using examples like Flint or that awful Kids for Cash scandal.
To show why just saying trust the experts isn't enough. Systems fail. Elites can be out of touch.
You need context, values, awareness of bias, not just blind faith and expertise.
Yeah, a call for more humility, less worshiping of facts, maybe more probing of conventional wisdom in journalism and academia.
Even saying both sidesism might be a compliment sometimes, reflecting a real effort to weigh different claims fairly.
That's the suggestion. A commitment to evaluation over affirmation.
So bringing this all together for this deep dive, this tension between expertise and public skepticism, it's really tangled, isn't it?
Deeply. Driven by perceived overreach, different values, real questions about how expertise works and how it's presented.
We hope this gave you, our listener, a richer picture, moving beyond just people hate experts and maybe some of those aha moments.
And it leaves us with a big question to chew on, doesn't it? Given how complex and value-filled these policy issues are.
How do we foster better dialogue? One that respects both expertise and diverse public views.
And what role does that epistemic humility play in bridging the diploma divide, rebuilding trust? Lots to think about.
Definitely. We encourage you to look closer at the sources, reflect on your own experiences.
How do you navigate expert information? When have you seen it clash or align with common sense or your values?
And what are the responsibilities of experts when they talk to the public? Big questions. Thanks for joining.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.